The smell of Mom's roast chicken made me sick. Not because it wasn't good, it was perfect like always, but because I knew what was coming. I could feel it in the way Derek kept glancing at our parents, that snake smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "So, Grace," he said, cutting into his potatoes with theatrical precision, "I've been meaning to talk to you about living arrangements." My fork paused halfway to my mouth. The dining room suddenly felt smaller, the walls pressing in. Dad wouldn't meet my eyes. Mom studied her wine glass like it held ancient secrets. Living arrangements. I set down my fork carefully, watching condensation bead on my water glass. Derek leaned back in his chair, and there it was, that smirk I'd seen 1,000 times growing up. The one that meant he'd gotten away with something. "Yeah. See, now that Mom and Dad have moved to the condo in Florida, this house belongs to me. And well, I'm going to need the space. So you have 1 week to move out." The words hung in the air like smoke. I heard the kitchen faucet dripping. Heard my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. Mom's fork scraped against her plate, the sound like nails on bone. "Derek, maybe we should discuss this privately," Dad said quietly, but there was no strength in it. Just the hollow voice of a man who'd already made his choice. 1 week. I repeated, my voice steadier than I felt. "This is my home. I've been taking care of this place for 3 years while you were off doing God knows what in California." "Not anymore, it's not." Derek pulled out his phone, scrolled through something. "All legal. Mom and Dad signed it over to me last month. You've been living here rent-free long enough, don't you think?" I looked at my parents. Really looked at them. Mom's eyes were red-rimmed, but she didn't speak. Dad just kept eating methodical bites, chewing like he could grind down his guilt along with the chicken. "Before I go further, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I like to know how far my stories are reaching, and a like and subscribe means a lot to small channels like ours and will keep these stories coming. Now let's continue." The rage came slow, bubbling up from somewhere deep and ancient. 3 years. 3 years I'd stayed in this town when I had a job offer in Boston. 3 years I'd managed Mom's physical therapy after her stroke, driven Dad to his heart doctor appointments, maintained this house, paid the utilities, kept the garden alive that Mom loved so much. And they'd given it to Derek. Derek, who hadn't visited once during Mom's recovery. Derek, who forgot Dad's birthday every single year. Derek, who'd stolen my college fund when I was 17 and never paid it back. My purse sat on the chair beside me. Inside it, a manila envelope I'd picked up from the county recorder's office that afternoon. I'd gone on a hunch, because Derek's sudden interest in family dinner, after 2 years of silence, had felt wrong. Because I'd learned long ago to trust my instincts when it came to my brother. 1 week, I said softly, reaching into my purse. "That's generous of you, Derek." He grinned, thinking he'd won. "I'm glad you're being reasonable about this." "Oh, I'm being very reasonable." I pulled out the envelope, slid the documents across the table. The paper whispered against the wood. "Because according to these property records, Mom and Dad didn't just sign the house over to you. They signed it over to both of us. Joint ownership. Equal shares. Filed 6 weeks ago." Derek's face went white. He snatched the papers, his eyes darting across the text. "That's impossible," he said, but his voice cracked. "They told me." "What did they tell you exactly?" I turned to my parents. Mom had tears streaming down her face now. Dad had stopped eating, his fork suspended in mid-air. "Grace," Mom whispered, "we can explain." "I'm sure you can." I stood up, my chair scraping against the hardwood. "But here's what's going to happen instead. Derek, you have 24 hours to remove yourself from this property. Since I'm the one who's actually been living here, maintaining it, paying the bills, I'm invoking my right as co-owner to claim primary residence. The law is very clear on this. You can't. I can. I already spoke to a lawyer this morning. Had a feeling I might need to." I looked at each of them in turn. 24 hours, Derek. "I'll be changing the locks at 6 p.m. tomorrow." The sound of Derek's fork hitting his plate echoed like a gunshot. But it was the look on his face that made my blood freeze, a darkness I'd never seen before, not even during our worst childhood fights. "You have no idea what you just did," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. He stood, pulled out his own phone and made a call. "Yeah, it's me. We have a problem." "No, she knows. About the house, but..." His eyes met mine, and something in them made my skin crawl. "Everything else too. We need to move up the timeline." He walked out without another word, leaving me standing there with my parents, both of them crying now, and the terrible realization creeping up my spine that the house was the least of what I'd just uncovered. The silence after Derek left felt like standing in the eye of a hurricane. I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway ticking, each second a small detonation. Mom's crying had dissolved into quiet hiccups. Dad just sat there, his hands flat on the table like he was trying to keep the world from spinning away. What did he mean, everything else? My voice cut through the quiet, sharp as broken glass. Mom shook her head, pressing her napkin to her mouth. Dad finally looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Fear. Real bone-deep terror. "Gracie, you need to leave this alone," he said. "Take the house. We wanted you to have it anyway. Just let Derek go and forget about this." "Forget about what, exactly?" I moved closer, my hands gripping the back of my chair. The wood felt solid, real, an anchor in a room that suddenly seemed to be tilting. What timeline was he talking about? What else don't I know? The taste of copper filled my mouth. I'd bitten my cheek without realizing it. Mom stood abruptly, her chair toppling backward with a crash that made us all flinch. "I need air," she gasped, rushing toward the back door. Dad followed her, leaving me alone in the dining room with the remains of our last family dinner scattered across the table like evidence of a crime. I pulled out my phone, opened the photos I'd taken at the county recorder's office. I'd gotten more than just the property records. There were other documents, ones I'd almost skipped over because they seemed irrelevant. Business filings, articles of incorporation, all listing this address, this house, as the primary location for something called Hartwell Family Trust. My fingers trembled as I scrolled through the images. The trust had been established 8 years ago. It held assets, significant ones, but the details were buried in legal language I didn't fully understand. What I did understand was that Derek wasn't listed as a trustee. Mom and Dad were. And so was I, apparently, though I'd never signed anything. The back door opened. I looked up expecting my parents, but it was neither of them. A woman I'd never seen before stood in my kitchen doorway. She was maybe 60, silver hair pulled back in a tight bun, wearing an expensive charcoal suit that looked out of place in our modest home. She held a briefcase and had the kind of face that probably never smiled, all sharp angles and cold assessment. Grace Hartwell. Her voice matched her appearance, crisp and businesslike. "Who are you? How did you get in here?" "Your mother let me in through the garden gate. My name is Patricia Vance. I'm the executor of your grandmother's estate." She set her briefcase on the counter, the snap of the locks unnaturally loud. "We need to talk about why your brother is trying to kill you." The room spun. I gripped the counter, feeling the cold granite under my palms, smelling the lemon cleaner I'd used that morning. Real sensations. Grounding. "I'm sorry, what?" Patricia pulled out a folder, laid it on the counter between us. "Your grandmother, Rose Hartwell, passed away 3 months ago. She left an estate worth approximately $43 million to be divided equally between you and your brother, with one condition. You both had to be alive and present at the reading of the will, which is scheduled for this Friday. 3 days from now." The words came at me like punches. Grandmother Rose. I barely remembered her. Just a stern woman who'd visited once when I was 7, who'd argued with Dad and then disappeared from our lives. I'd thought she was dead already. "If either of you fails to appear or is deceased, the entire estate goes to the surviving grandchild." Patricia's eyes bore into mine. "Your brother found out about this 2 months ago. He's been planning since then." "Planning what?" But I already knew. The cold certainty of it settled into my bones. Your parents didn't give him the house, Grace. They gave it to both of you because your grandmother's lawyer required it, proof that you were being treated equally, or the will would be contested. Your brother needed you to think you were safe, settled, while he arranged for an accident. She pulled out another document. This is a life insurance policy he took out on you 6 weeks ago. $2 million. He's listed as the beneficiary, claimed you'd agreed to it for estate planning purposes. My legs gave out. I sat down hard on one of the kitchen stools, the metal cold through my jeans. That's insane. He's my brother. He wouldn't. 3 days ago, someone tampered with the brake lines on your car. You had them fixed yesterday, correct? Told the mechanic you thought you might have hit something. The memory rushed back. The spongy feeling in the brake pedal, the near miss at the intersection on Main Street. The mechanic had looked concerned, said it was lucky I'd brought it in when I did. Another day or two and the lines would have failed completely. Oh God, I whispered. Patricia's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Maybe pity, maybe respect. Your grandmother knew what your brother was. She changed her will 5 years ago specifically to protect you, but she didn't count on dying before you were old enough to understand the stakes. She thought she had more time. Why didn't anyone tell me? She didn't want you to know you were wealthy. She thought it would corrupt you like it did your brother. She wanted you to build your own life first. Patricia closed the folder. But now you know. And so does Derek. Which means the next 72 hours are going to be the most dangerous of your life. The sound of footsteps on the front porch made us both freeze. Heavy footsteps. Not my parents, they were still in the garden. Through the frosted glass of the front door, I could see a shadow. Someone large. Waiting. Patricia's hand moved to her briefcase, and when it came back out, she was holding a gun. How many people did he bring? She asked quietly, moving toward the hallway. What? I don't. The front door exploded inward with a deafening crack, wood splintering around the lock. A man I'd never seen before stepped through, and he wasn't alone. Behind him, Derek appeared, but this wasn't the brother I'd argued with at dinner. This Derek had cold, flat eyes and something dark in his hand that caught the hallway light. I really wish you'd just taken the week, Gracie, he said, and raised what I now recognized as a gun, pointing it directly at my chest. Patricia fired first. The sound was deafening in the confined space, a crack that made my ears ring. The bullet hit the doorframe inches from Derek's head, sending splinters flying. He dove sideways, crashing into the stranger beside him, and they both tumbled back onto the porch. Move! Patricia grabbed my arm, yanking me toward the back door. Now, Grace! My legs finally obeyed, muscle memory taking over when my brain couldn't process what was happening. We ran through the kitchen, past the table where 30 minutes ago I'd been eating dinner with my family, out into the garden where Mom's roses bloomed in the twilight, their perfume sickeningly sweet in the cooling air. Mom and Dad were gone. The garden gate swung open, creaking on its hinges. They sold me out, I gasped, the realization hitting harder than it should have. They knew. They knew what he was planning. Later, Patricia snapped. We ran through the gate into the alley behind the house. Her car, a black sedan that screamed federal agent or lawyer, idled at the curb. She'd planned for this. Known it would go wrong. Get in. I threw myself into the passenger seat. Patricia peeled out before I'd even closed the door, the tires screaming against asphalt. In the side mirror, I saw Derek burst through the garden gate, saw him raise his gun, but we were already turning the corner, the house disappearing from view. My house. My home. The place I'd sacrificed everything to maintain. Where are we going? My voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. Somewhere safe. Somewhere he can't find you until Friday. Patricia's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Then you show up to that will reading, claim your inheritance, and your brother goes to prison for attempted murder. My parents are complicit. I'm sorry, Grace, but they chose their side. She glanced at me, and for the first time, her expression softened slightly. Your grandmother knew. That's why she left everything to you and Derek equally. She hoped the money would be enough to satisfy him, that he wouldn't risk losing half of $43 million. She didn't realize he'd already become the kind of man who'd rather have it all than share anything. We drove in silence for 20 minutes, winding through neighborhoods I barely recognized, until we pulled up to a small hotel on the outskirts of town. Patricia had already booked a room, had a key waiting. She'd planned for everything. The room was generic, bland, the kind of place you forgot the moment you left. But it had a deadbolt and a chain lock, and right now that felt like a castle fortress. Patricia set her briefcase on the bed, pulled out more folders. You need to understand what you're inheriting. Your grandmother built a pharmaceutical empire from nothing. Hartwell Biogenics. She sold it 15 years ago but retained significant stock options and real estate holdings. The portfolio is diverse, protected, legitimate. I sat on the edge of the other bed, my hands shaking. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind a hollow ache. And Derek knew about all of this. Your parents told him. 2 months ago, when they found out Rose had died. They thought he deserved to know to prepare. Patricia's mouth twisted. What they didn't realize was that Derek had been waiting for this his whole life. He'd racked up gambling debts, bad investments, loan sharks. He needed that money, and he needed all of it. My phone buzzed. A text from Mom. Please come home. We can work this out. Derek just wants to talk. I showed it to Patricia. She snorted. Classic. Making you think you're overreacting, that you're the problem. She pulled out her own phone, made a call. Yes, it's Vance. We're secure. No, there was an incident. I need police presence at the Hartwell residence immediately. Attempted murder, armed intruder. Yes, I'll hold. While she talked to the police, I scrolled through my contacts. 3 years in this town, taking care of my parents, and who did I have? Some acquaintances from the grocery store, the mechanic who'd saved my life without knowing it, a book club that met on Thursdays. I'd given up my friends in college, my job opportunities, my whole life, for parents who'd handed me to my brother like a sacrifice. The grief hit me then, sudden and overwhelming. Not for what I'd lost, but for what I'd never really had. Family who loved me. Parents who would protect me. A brother who was supposed to be on my side. Patricia ended her call. Police are picking up Derek now. Your parents too, for questioning. The man with him was a known enforcer. Works for one of the loan sharks Derek owes. They'll both be charged. And then what? I looked up at her. Friday I show up, get the money, and what? My family is destroyed. My brother goes to prison. My parents are accomplices. I'm alone with $43 million I never wanted. Patricia sat down beside me, and for the first time she looked tired. Human. Your grandmother wrote you a letter. I wasn't supposed to give it to you until after the reading, but... She pulled an envelope from her jacket pocket. I think you need it now. The envelope was cream-colored, expensive paper, my name written in shaky handwriting on the front. I opened it carefully, unfolded the single page inside. My dearest Grace, it began. If you're reading this, I'm gone, and Patricia has told you the truth about your inheritance. I know this must be overwhelming. I know you probably have questions about why I stayed away, why I let your parents raise you without my interference. The truth is, I saw what my money did to your father, how it made him weak, dependent, entitled. I saw what it was doing to Derek, even as a child. But you, Grace, were different. Even at 7 years old, you had a strength they didn't. A moral compass that couldn't be bought. I stayed away because I wanted you to develop that strength without the corruption of wealth. I'm sorry it meant you felt abandoned. I'm sorry for a lot of things. But I'm not sorry for leaving you everything you need to build the life you deserve. The money is a tool, nothing more. What you do with it, who you become, that's up to you. You were always my favorite, even though I barely knew you because you were the only one who didn't need me. I hope you'll forgive me someday. I hope you'll use this gift to find the happiness your father and brother never could. With all my love, Grandmother Rose. Tears blurred the words. I read it again, then a third time, feeling something crack open in my chest. Not grief, not anger, but something stranger. Relief, maybe. Or permission to finally let go. She was right about one thing, I said quietly, folding the letter. I don't need them. I never did. Patricia nodded. So what do you want to do? I thought about Derek, probably in handcuffs by now, finally facing consequences for once in his entitled life. I thought about my parents, who'd chosen comfort over courage, who'd let their son become a monster rather than face their own failures. I thought about the house I'd nearly died for, the sacrifices I'd made for people who saw me as expendable. And I thought about Friday, 3 days away, when I could walk into that lawyer's office and claim a future I'd never imagined. I want to show up on Friday, I said. I want to look Derek in the eye when he realizes he lost everything. And then I want to leave this town and never come back. And your parents? I pulled out my phone, typed a response to Mom's text. Tell Derek he should have taken the week. See you all in court. I hit send, then blocked the number. It felt like setting down a weight I'd been carrying my whole life. Patricia smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from her. Your grandmother would have liked that answer. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the hum of the air conditioner, the distant sound of traffic. Outside, the sun had fully set, leaving the world in darkness. But inside this anonymous hotel room, with a stranger who'd saved my life and a letter from a grandmother who'd loved me from afar, I felt something I hadn't felt in 3 years. Felt free. Friday came faster than I expected. I wore the one good suit I owned, the one I'd bought for job interviews I'd never gone to. Patricia drove us to the lawyer's office downtown, a sleek building of glass and steel that reflected the morning sun like a blade. Derek was already there, flanked by 2 police officers. His wrists free but his options limited. He'd made bail, but the charges were serious enough that he wasn't going anywhere. Mom and Dad sat on the opposite side of the waiting room, looking smaller somehow, diminished. They didn't look at me when I walked in. The reading took 15 minutes. The lawyer, a man who looked like he'd been born in a 3-piece suit, read through the terms in a monotone voice. $43 million, split equally between Grace Hartwell and Derek Hartwell, with all assets to be transferred immediately. Derek's half would be frozen pending the criminal investigation. If convicted, it would revert to me. When it was over, I stood up, gathered my copies of the paperwork, and walked toward the door. Derek called out to me, his voice cracking. Gracie, wait. Or family. We can work this out. I stopped, turned to look at him. Really look at him. I saw a stranger wearing my brother's face. A man who'd been willing to kill me for money he didn't earn. A man our parents had enabled, protected, chosen over me again and again. No, I said simply. We're not. I walked out into the bright morning, Patricia beside me. The promise of a future I'd built myself stretching out ahead like an open road. My phone buzzed one last time. A number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. Grace. A woman's voice, unfamiliar. My name is Jennifer Chen. I'm the CEO of Hartwell Biogenics. Your grandmother asked me to call you after the will reading. She thought you might be interested in learning about the company she built, maybe even joining the board. No pressure, but if you're interested in doing something meaningful with your inheritance, we'd love to talk. I looked back at the building where my brother sat in ruins of his own making, where my parents faced the consequences of their choices. Then I looked forward at the city spreading out before me, full of possibilities I'd never allowed myself to imagine. I'm interested, I said. When can we meet? As Patricia and I walked toward her car, I felt the weight of the past 3 years lifting, dissolving like morning fog. I'd come to that dinner table expecting a quiet evening with family. Instead, I'd lost everything I thought I wanted and gained everything I never knew I needed. Revenge, I realized, wasn't about destroying Derek. He'd done that to himself. Revenge was building a life so full, so purposeful, so completely mine that he'd spend the rest of his days knowing exactly what he'd lost when he chose greed over family. And I was just getting started.